Imagine moving into your dream apartment. A quiet, cozy place where everything seems perfect. But what if that dream turned into a nightmare? What if the person you trusted the most, your landlord, was hiding something sinister? For one tenant, this wasn't just a terrifying thought, it was a horrifying reality. Behind locked doors and charming smiles, a killer's evil secret festered, waiting to be uncovered. But by the time the truth came to light, it was almost too late. Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you a chilling and twisted tale, one of trust betrayed, lies exposed, and a deadly secret hidden in plain sight. This is the story of Tenant Terrified, the killer's evil secret. What would you do if the walls of your home carried unspeakable horrors? What if the person living next door wasn't who they seemed? As we delve into this harrowing case, you'll be left questioning, how well do you really know the people closest to you? Stay with us as we unravel the terrifying story of a tenant who uncovered the horrifying truth about their landlord, too late to escape. Emily Hart had always dreamed of finding a place where she could start fresh, a home that felt like her own sanctuary. When she stumbled upon the listing for a charming vintage apartment on Maplewood Lane, it felt like fate. The photos showcased a bright, airy space with hardwood floors and a picturesque bay window, all within her modest budget. It seemed almost too good to be true. When she met the landlord, Jim Miller, he immediately put her at ease. Jim appeared to be in his late 50s, with a kind smile and an easygoing demeanor. He made a point to mention how much he cared about his tenants, even offering to help with her move. To Emily, it felt like she'd struck gold. A great apartment and a landlord who seemed genuinely helpful. The first few weeks went by without incident. Emily settled into her new home, decorating the space with personal touches and making it her own. The neighborhood was peaceful, and the building was quiet, save for the occasional creak of old floorboards or distant sound of footsteps. She thought she had found the perfect escape from the chaos of her previous life. But small, strange details began to gnaw at her. The first thing she noticed was the peculiar smell. It wasn't constant, but every now and then, an unpleasant metallic odor would drift up from the basement. It was faint enough to dismiss at first, but once she noticed it, she couldn't ignore it entirely. Jim explained it away, saying the basement housed old furniture and tools that had been gathering dust for decades. Still, there was something unsettling about his insistence that no one, not even tenants, had any reason to go down there. Emily also found Jim's habit of being overly attentive to be both comforting and slightly unnerving. He would drop by unannounced, offering to fix minor things she hadn't even complained about. While she appreciated his efforts, his presence started to feel intrusive. She chalked it up to him being an overly involved landlord, though a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that he was keeping tabs on her. Her unease deepened one evening when she decided to introduce herself to her neighbor, Claire Winters. Claire, an older woman with a reserved air about her, had lived in the building for years. Their interaction was brief but strange, leaving Emily with an odd sense that Claire was holding something back. When she casually mentioned her plans to explore the basement one day, Claire's expression turned stiff. The moment passed quickly, but the tension lingered. As the days turned into weeks, Emily began to feel a subtle shift in the apartment's atmosphere. The late-night noises she initially attributed to the old pipes became harder to ignore. Sometimes it sounded like faint knocking. Other times, like something being dragged. She convinced herself it was all in her head, a result of moving into an older building and adjusting to its quirks, but the signs were becoming harder to dismiss. A quick online search revealed a startling history about the building, a long list of tenants who had moved in and disappeared without warning. The most recent disappearance was only a few months before she had moved in. Although she tried to rationalize the pattern as coincidental, a gnawing sense of dread began to creep into her thoughts. Despite her growing discomfort, Emily told herself it was all paranoia. After all, Jim had been nothing but polite and accommodating. Yet every time she caught that metallic smell wafting through her apartment, her stomach tightened. Deep down, she knew there was something wrong, something she couldn't yet explain. The unease, the strange noises, and the chilling history of the building all pointed to one thing. Emily's dream apartment was hiding a secret. What she didn't know was how deeply that secret would threaten her life. Emily's discomfort began to fester as the unsettling occurrences around her apartment grew harder to dismiss. The faint noises she had initially attributed to the creaks and groans of an old building were becoming more distinct. At first, it was the occasional muffled bang, something she assumed came from another tenant moving furniture late at night. But soon, the sounds became stranger, soft, dragging noises and even faint whispers that seemed to drift through the walls. Despite her growing unease, Emily tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. She convinced herself the whispers were just her imagination, a result of living alone for the first time. Yet, the uneasiness clung to her like a shadow, making her hyper-aware of every little sound in the quiet building. It didn't help that Jim seemed to be everywhere. He would linger outside her apartment under the pretense of performing maintenance, or casually ask about her schedule in ways that felt oddly invasive. Seeking some reassurance, Emily decided to speak to Claire Winters again, hoping the older woman might offer some insight. Claire had always seemed guarded, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something about the building's strange atmosphere. When she brought up the noises and her curiosity about the basement, Claire's reaction was unsettling. Her face tightened, and though her response was brief, it left Emily with the distinct impression that Claire was afraid. That interaction stuck with her, planting a seed of doubt that refused to go away. Emily's discomfort only deepened when she began to notice small, peculiar details she had overlooked before. Jim's insistence on keeping the basement locked felt more suspicious now. She recalled how he had casually dismissed her concerns about the smell, his tone light but his words definitive, as though the matter was closed. Unable to let it go, Emily decided to dig a little deeper into the building's history. She stayed up late one night, scrolling through old news articles and public records online. What she found sent a chill down her spine. Over the years, several tenants had left the building abruptly, with no formal notice and no forwarding address. There were even 2 reported cases of missing persons who had last been seen at the property. Both cases had gone cold, with no evidence to suggest foul play, but the pattern was undeniable. The most recent disappearance was of a young man named David Hensley, who had rented the apartment just down the hall from Emily. He had moved in 6 months before her and vanished 2 months later. The details of his case were eerily similar to others, a tenant who seemed happy and settled, only to disappear without a trace. Emily tried to brush off her findings, telling herself it was just a series of unfortunate coincidences. But deep down, she knew the odds of so many unexplained disappearances tied to one building were slim. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeply wrong about the place, and about Jim. The turning point came late one night when the noises became louder and more distinct than ever before. Emily lay in bed, heart pounding, as she listened to what sounded like something heavy being dragged across the floor beneath her. The sound seemed to echo through the stillness of the night, growing louder and then fading into an eerie silence. She stared at the ceiling, paralyzed with fear and unable to sleep. For the first time, Emily truly began to question if she was safe in her own home. Whatever was happening in the building, it was clear she was getting too close to a truth someone wanted to keep hidden. Emily's fear reached a tipping point. The noises, the strange behavior of her landlord, and the troubling history of the building had created a web of unease she could no longer ignore. Something dark was happening here, and she was determined to find out what. Her focus turned to the basement, the one area Jim was adamant no one enter. That single off-limits space had become the epicenter of her suspicions. One Saturday evening, when she was sure Jim was out, Emily decided to investigate. Her heart pounded as she crept down the narrow staircase leading to the basement. The air grew colder the farther she descended, and the metallic odor she had smelled before became stronger and more pungent. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the dusty walls, amplifying her dread. At the bottom of the stairs, she found the basement cluttered with old furniture, rusted tools, and stacks of cardboard boxes. It looked unassuming at first, just the kind of storage one might expect in a building this old. But as she moved farther in, her eyes fell on something unusual. In the farthest corner of the basement, partially obscured by a tarp, was a door. Emily froze. The door was unlike anything else in the basement. It was newer, with a heavy padlock securing it, and it seemed entirely out of place amidst the surrounding decay. Her pulse quickened as she stepped closer. The lock was sturdy, but the doorframe looked fragile enough to break with some effort. She hesitated, the weight of her growing fear almost convincing her to turn back. But the pull of curiosity, and the desperate need for answers, was stronger. With a surge of determination, she searched the basement for something she could use to pry the door open. She found an old crowbar among the discarded tools and got to work. The lock didn't give easily, but after several tense minutes, the door creaked open. What lay beyond left her breathless. The small, windowless room was lined with plastic sheets, giving it an unsettling, sterile feel. The walls were stained with dark streaks that looked like they had been hastily scrubbed, but not well enough to erase the evidence of something sinister. In the corner of the room was a large industrial freezer. Emily's hands trembled as she approached the freezer, the sharp metallic smell growing almost unbearable. She hesitated, every instinct in her body screaming at her to leave, but she forced herself to open it. Inside was a collection of personal belongings: watches, wallets, clothing. Each item seemed to belong to a different person. Beneath the pile was a stack of photographs. She shuffled through them, her stomach churning with each one. The photos were of people, smiling, unsuspecting faces captured in what appeared to be their final moments. And then she saw something that made her blood run cold. Among the photographs was Claire Winters. The discovery sent Emily stumbling backward, her mind racing. The kind neighbor who had seemed uneasy but harmless wasn't missing by chance. She had been part of whatever horror had unfolded here. But the implications of what that meant, about Claire, about Jim, about the entire building, were almost too much to process. Before Emily could fully absorb what she had found, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps descending the stairs. Heavy and deliberate, they echoed through the basement, growing louder with each step. Emily froze, panic taking hold. She had gone too far, and now someone knew. Emily stood frozen in the basement, her breath shallow as the heavy footsteps echoed closer. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she couldn't move. She clutched the stack of photographs, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just uncovered. The padlocked door, the freezer filled with belongings, and the haunting image of Claire Winters among the photos painted a horrifying picture. She scrambled to hide the photos, shoving them into her jacket just as the basement door creaked open. The dim light at the top of the stairs cast a shadow that stretched toward her, and she quickly darted behind a stack of boxes, heart pounding. The footsteps grew louder as someone descended, the floorboards creaking under their weight. Peering through a gap in the boxes, she saw Jim. His face, usually warm and polite, now carried an eerie calmness that sent a chill down her spine. He moved with purpose, scanning the room as though he sensed her presence. Emily held her breath, her heart hammering in her chest. Jim stopped in front of the now open door, his body stiffening as he realized someone had been inside. He stepped into the small room, his back to Emily, and she seized the moment to slip toward the stairs. Every step felt agonizingly slow, each creak beneath her feet threatening to give her away. Just as she reached the base of the stairs, she heard him turn. Emily bolted, her adrenaline overpowering her fear. She tore up the stairs and into her apartment, locking the door behind her. She pressed her back against it, struggling to catch her breath. Her hands shook as she pulled out the photos, laying them on the table. The images told a story she could no longer deny. Jim was not just a landlord, he was a predator, and Claire had not disappeared by accident. As she pieced together what she had found, she realized the belongings in the freezer likely belonged to the missing tenants she had read about. Jim had been targeting his tenants for years, luring them in with the promise of a cozy home, only to make them disappear when they got too close to the truth. But something didn't add up. Claire's face in the photos wasn't one of fear or desperation. It was one of calm. The image showed her standing beside Jim, both of them smiling. It became horrifyingly clear that Claire wasn't a victim. She was an accomplice. The revelation shook Emily to her core. Claire, the seemingly nervous and distant neighbor, had been part of Jim's twisted game all along. Her role, Emily realized, must have been to dissuade tenants like herself from digging too deeply, keeping them off Jim's trail. Claire's sudden disappearance had been nothing more than a ruse to avoid suspicion. Emily knew she couldn't stay silent. She gathered the photos and left her apartment, heading to the nearest police station. When she explained everything to the authorities, they took her claims seriously, especially when she handed over the evidence. As the investigation unfolded, detectives uncovered more than Emily could have imagined. The building's history of missing tenants spanned over a decade, with Jim and Claire working as a team. Claire had helped identify vulnerable tenants, those with no close family or ties, and Jim would eliminate them. The belongings in the freezer were the last remnants of their lives, trophies of their gruesome crimes. Emily thought she was safe after reporting the truth, but her sense of relief was short-lived. That night, she returned to her apartment to find the door unlocked. Inside, the place was eerily quiet. The photos she had left behind were gone, and in their place was a single item, a note scrawled in shaky handwriting. It simply read, "You shouldn't have gone to the basement." Her blood ran cold. Jim and Claire knew she had betrayed them, and she wasn't sure how far they were willing to go to silence her. Emily's hands trembled as she held the note, the weight of its message sinking in. They knew. Jim and Claire were not only aware of what she had done, they wanted her to know they were watching. The apartment that once felt like a refuge now felt like a trap, its walls closing in on her. She tried to steady herself, but her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. She wasn't safe here anymore. Without hesitation, she grabbed her essentials, her phone, wallet, and a bag with a few belongings, and fled the apartment. Every sound, every shadow in the hallway felt like a threat. Her breath quickened as she stepped outside into the chilly night air, her eyes darting around the empty street. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Emily went to stay with a close friend, determined not to return until she felt secure. She contacted the police again to report the note, but there was little they could do without catching Jim and Claire in the act. The investigation into their crimes had only just begun, and the authorities needed more time to gather evidence. Emily knew time wasn't on her side. The following days were a blur of fear and paranoia. Emily rarely left the house, her anxiety growing with every passing moment. She kept her phone close, waiting for updates from the police. She couldn't help but feel that Jim and Claire were one step ahead of her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the photographs, the freezer, and the dark room in the basement. Then, the situation escalated. One morning, Emily's friend found a small envelope slipped under their front door. Inside was another note, written in the same shaky handwriting. This time, it read, "You can't run forever." Enclosed with the note was a photograph of Emily, taken recently from just outside the window of the apartment where she was staying. The threat was clear. They weren't just watching, they were closing in. Emily realized she couldn't wait for the police to act. She decided to take matters into her own hands. She began researching Jim and Claire's pasts, looking for anything that might give her an edge. What she discovered was chilling. Jim had owned the building for over 15 years, and Claire had been his tenant for nearly as long. Before that, both had lived in different towns where similar disappearances had occurred. They had been moving from place to place, leaving a trail of victims behind them, but had always managed to avoid capture. They were meticulous, careful, and disturbingly patient. Emily shared her findings with the detectives handling the case, who were now building a solid case against Jim and Claire. The police placed the building under surveillance, hoping to catch the pair in the act. Emily was advised to remain in hiding, but she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. One night, the police received a tip from a tenant in the building. Jim and Claire had been seen carrying large bags into the basement late at night. This was the break they needed. A raid was planned, and the authorities moved in swiftly. The raid revealed the full extent of Jim and Claire's crimes. The basement contained more than just the freezer and its trophies. Hidden compartments revealed weapons, restraints, and a meticulously kept journal documenting their victims. The journal was the key to tying them to numerous cold cases across the state. Jim and Claire were arrested, their reign of terror finally brought to an end. Emily was relieved, but the trauma of the experience lingered. She returned to her apartment only to pack her belongings, unable to stomach the idea of living there again. Despite everything, Emily felt a sense of closure. Her courage had exposed the truth and saved future tenants from falling victim to Jim and Claire's twisted games. But as she walked away from Maplewood Lane for the final time, she couldn't shake the feeling that their evil would haunt her forever. Thank you for joining us on Mystery Minds. This case leaves us with a haunting question. How well do we know the people we trust? If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more chilling tales. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.